Hello everyone, and welcome to another upload. Today's story is packed with what you people love most. Twists and turns, meta self-awareness, good old-fashioned horror, and of course, my voice. Keep in mind to be respectful in the comments section, and don't be the one to ruin the fun for everyone else. I'm talking to you, James. Just a bit of fun. In any case, I hope you enjoy. Be good people, my followers.
Don't make me come down there.
After sprinkling Parmesan over the mouth-watering chicken and spinach tortellini I just made, I scraped half the dish into the sink and turned on the garbage disposal with an elated sigh. I hated having to throw half of it away each time. The only reason I moved into this apartment was because rent was cheaper after I'd lost my job and nearly burned through my meager savings. It definitely wasn't the suffocating ambience and sketchy neighborhood, and it most definitely wasn't the meal prep boxes left daily at my door. I only learned about those when the previous tenant visited me. Lita dropped by the very same day I moved in. After pointing out the leaky corners I should avoid, suggesting affordable roach traps, and teaching me how to lock the windows with a broomstick, she mentioned the boxes. I thought she was kidding, but she was dead serious. I had to prepare dinner each day, dump half in the garbage disposal, and eat the rest right away. She seemed so nonchalant about it, but I wasn't. Who was sending them? Why? What would happen if I refused? She had no solid answers. All she knew was what the previous tenant had told her, which is what they were told by the previous tenant, and so on. Origins unknown. Even the landlord had no idea this was going on, and Lita stressed that I must never tell him. She also stressed that I must never refuse. Why? She said protection, claiming that for as long as she lived here, this apartment was never robbed. Was she seriously insinuating that this stupid requirement protected her? She shrugged and said anything was possible. She didn't question the absurdity of it all, but she did question my reluctance. She assured me that she'd eaten from the boxes every day for the year she'd lived here, and they were legit. No prank, no poison, no strings attached. Just dump half in the garbage disposal and eat the rest right away. She began listing the various meals she'd prepped, and my empty stomach growled. I hadn't had a decent meal in days, and it didn't take me long before I caved. Now, after a month of delicious food, my unease had ebbed, but not my disdain. After I turned off the garbage disposal, I grabbed the remaining chicken and spinach tortellini and plopped down on the floor, eating my only meal today. Despite licking the plate clean, my stomach still complained, and I glared at the sink. Half a portion wasn't enough, and I was sick of wasting part of a perfectly good meal. One that I'd worked hard on, no less. I was done following these ridiculous rules. Tomorrow, I was going to eat the entire thing. And I did. For the next week, I prepped and ate the whole meal, and nothing happened. I'll admit, I was nervous the first few days, but when the world didn't collapse and the boxes kept coming, I felt pretty clever for being the first to break this ridiculous and wasteful trend. As long as food kept getting delivered right to my door, I was going to eat it. All of it. 8 days later, I realized my actions could have killed me. My bladder woke me up that night, and I shambled to the bathroom. After washing my hands, I made my way back to my sleeping bag, and I frowned at an unusual draft. Before I could figure out where it was coming from, a startling force knocked me to the ground. My heart leapt to my throat, and it probably would have jumped out of my mouth if there wasn't a hand smothering my scream. The stench of sweat filled my lungs as I struggled beneath a bony weight, my panicked thoughts flashing horrifying scenarios through my mind. A sharp hiss for silence pierced my ear as the cold metal of a gun pressed against my temple, and I abided. Trembling face down on the floor, I held my breath, my eyes wide in fearful anticipation as I heard my attacker grunting and rummaging. I turned my gaze to the open window, and I cursed myself for not propping the broomstick properly as I saw it lying on the floor. In no time, the intruder had shoved a filthy rag in my mouth and yanked my arms behind my back, binding them before he lashed my ankles together. Only then did he take his weight off me and flip me over, his sunken eyes wild under a mess of hair. He was definitely on something, and it was frightening. His actions had no hesitation. He came here for something, and he wasn't leaving without it. The question was, what? That mystery didn't last long, as he demanded to know where I hid my valuables. I stared at him in disbelief. Did he not see the squalor I was living in? I didn't even have furniture. Did he think I had cash stuffed in my frayed sleeping bag, gold hidden in the rusty oven, diamonds stashed behind the broken radiator? My baffled silence wasn't the answer he was looking for, and I cried out as he punched me in the face. He lifted his fist again, and I flinched, whimpering through my gag as I nodded towards my meager possessions, my wallet and my phone. He crawled over to them, and I crawled away, tears stinging my eyes as my cheeks throbbed to the rhythm of my stuttering again. I was certain $11.25 and a phone with a cracked screen wouldn't be enough to appease him. He seemed desperate enough to kill. I had to save myself before it was too late. As he tore through my wallet in frustration, I made my way to the kitchen, my eyes on the drawers. I just needed a knife to cut through these bonds, and I could make a run for it. Balancing on my knees, I bent over and reached up with my hands, my trembling fingers searching for the handle. Gripping it, I pulled, but it didn't move. This was the worst time for it to stick. I wiggled it as I always do, but my position was less than optimal, and the drawer refused to budge. After a particularly forceful yank, I lost my balance and fell with a grunt, and my terrified eyes turned towards the door as the intruder stomped in, gun aimed at me. I screamed and cowered against the cupboards. My heart slammed against my ribcage as my blood drained from my face. And then, the blood drained from his face. I followed his petrified gaze, and I screamed even louder as an unholy creature erupted from the sink. It towered over us like a giant furry centipede, pointy legs bristling from its long, inky body and spikes jutting out of its mouth. With a lurching motion, looking almost as though it was falling, it descended upon the intruder, silencing his scream with a stab straight through his throat. It didn't silence my screams, though, and I continued to shriek through my gag as the monster continued to stab the man, its sharp legs jabbing at him like a macabre typewriter. It was facing away, but that didn't stop the spraying blood from dotting every surface of the kitchen, including me. After a few final jabs, the monster stopped puncturing the intruder, and I watched in horror as it began sliding the mutilated body into its mouth, its legs tapping against the cracked tiles with excitement as though this was its first meal in ages. It devoured its kill the way a snake would, completely whole, and vomit fought my screams as it burned my throat. Once the last of the man disappeared, the creature gulped a few times and began spasming. For a hopeful moment, I thought it was choking and dying, but to my terrified dismay, I realized it was crushing the body within its own, as I heard bones snap and grind. Its convulsing stopped, and shock stole my screams as I watched its sharp legs retract into its blood-soaked fur. It now looked more like a giant fluffy caterpillar than a centipede, and my raspy breaths raced my pulse as I fearfully waited to see what it would do next. I stared in fraught disbelief as the monster began slithering across the floor, lapping up every drop of blood it came across before it stretched itself to reach the corners, walls, and ceiling. It was a lot more coordinated after eating, and that amplified my unease. Soon, only my corner was left, and it turns to me, giving me my first clear view of its face. It wasn't what I expected. I'd imagined pincers, antennas, and compound eyes, but instead I saw a rounded snout, floppy ears, and deep scars where its eyes should be. In any other scenario, it might pass for cute, but right now, all it did was reboot my vocal cords as it slithered closer. My muffled screams echoed as I pressed myself against the cupboards, petrified, but it didn't seem to care as it licked up the blood around me. When it began licking me, my heart almost stopped beating right then and there, as I was certain I was next on the menu. And then, it nuzzled me. I peeked through my eyelids, gulping, and I frowned in uneasy confusion as it curled up beside me, laying its large head on my lap. Slowly, I allowed my screams to stop, my tense body quivering with adrenaline. It had murdered my attacker, cleaned up the crime scene, and now was snuggling. A knock on the door startled us as my neighbor asked if I was all right, and I gasped, afraid the monster would go after them. To my surprise, it shrank away instead, slithering towards the sink and stretching itself thin before wiggling down the drain. The door crashed open, and my neighbors ran in, the look on their faces matching mine as they saw me bound in the corner, quaking with shock. After they freed me, and I found my voice, I mentioned the robber, but I gave him a happier ending as I claimed he ran away. As much as the creature terrified me, it saved me, and I didn't want it to get in trouble. Besides, who'd believe me? Maybe Lita would. I decided to call her in the morning, but that left me up all night, thinking, was that creature the thing we'd been feeding all this time? Was Lita right? Was it here to protect us? Was it too weak to scare off the robber before he attacked me because I'd unintentionally starved it for over a week? And despite all that, did it care for me that much that it didn't eat me, saved my life, and snuggled? I hoped that was the case. The creature didn't seem malevolent towards me, but there were still many unanswered questions and uncertainties, and I hoped Lita could answer them. She couldn't. I didn't mention the monster right away, afraid she'd be clueless and think I was insane. Instead, I asked if she knew what was protecting us and if anything unusual slithered out of the kitchen sink. She said our daily ritual protected us, a modern version of ancient sacrifices to the gods, and then she suggested I ask the landlord to fix my pest issues. I still had no answers. Too poor to leave the apartment and not willing to tempt fate, I decided to continue dumping half the meal in the garbage disposal. If that creature was going to protect me, I had to stay on its good side. The next day, I carried the box to the kitchen, pinned the receipts to my fridge, and began preparing a spicy salmon pizza, keeping a wary eye on the sink. As I turned to the recipe, running my finger down the instructions, it slipped from beneath the magnet and fell to the floor. This happened every once in a while, but this time the glossy paper disappeared beneath the fridge. Not willing to stick my hand under there, I grabbed a wire coat hanger, stretching it out, and began fishing. I recovered a medley of cereal crumbs, a fossilized chicken wing, a pen cap, a used car salesman's business card, 2 dead roaches, my receipt, and a strange yellowed paper. Curious, I dusted it off and read it, my eyes expanding with every word. December 11th, 2013. Dear Tenant, I moved into this apartment to care for my savior. I was a hunter, you see, and I had terminal cancer. I was reckless, and I didn't care when death would choose to take me. But Alesta cared. She protected me when I challenged a bear, appearing out of the blue and nearly dying herself. No one had ever done for me what she did, and I was moved by her selflessness. Alesta got injured and lost her eyesight. She was no longer able to hunt, and I felt responsible. I invited her to live with me. With the last of my savings, I signed up for 10 years of a meal prep program. I know I won't live that long. She may not either. But I still ask you, dear tenant, to continue honoring her. Every evening, prepare the meal and leave it in the cupboard under the sink. Then, go to sleep. The next morning, if the plate is still full, do with it as you wish. If the plate is empty, don't be alarmed. Just continue to honor my savior, and you'll be safe and secure as long as you live here. Dear tenant, this is all I ask of you, fulfilling a grateful man's dying wish. Please don't mention this to anyone, especially not the landlord. But if you end up moving out, please hand this letter to the new tenant. And when the 10 years are up on December 11th, 2023, please, my friend, consider renewing. Alesta deserves it. Thank you, and be blessed. Callum. I put the letter down, stunned. The creature truly was a protector. Alesta, brought here to be cared for by a man with little time. Callum put a lot of faith in a bunch of strangers, but I guess he didn't have a choice. He could have at least told us what we were dealing with, but maybe he didn't trust we'd have Alesta's best interest at heart. I was surprised we'd all followed the rule despite how cryptic it was. Well, at least until I came along. I looked at the letter again. Would I have been more inclined to abide if I'd received this? I'll never know. Because one of the previous tenants misplaced it and passed on the message verbally. The request changing from person to person like a game of telephone, until we were feeding Alesta half her intended meal through the garbage disposal. Well, that wasn't going to happen anymore, and I didn't want Alesta to hide anymore either. She saved my life, and I wanted to improve hers. After preparing the spicy salmon pizza, I placed it on the kitchen floor and sat cross-legged in front of it. Working up the courage, I cleared my throat and called out her name. Alesta. A soft, gurgling sound from the drain. Alesta, dinner. Food. Yummy food. I had never met a creature like Alesta before, and I had no idea how intelligent she was. Come out. It's okay. You don't have to eat in the drain anymore. You can live out here with me. I held my breath, and she poked her head out of the sink, her nose sniffing the air. Hey, Alesta. She gurgled again. She seemed to like hearing her name, the one her only friend had given her. Well, now she had another friend. I gestured to the pizza and smiled before I remembered she couldn't see. This pizza is all for you. I looked down with regret. I'm sorry I didn't feed you last week. I'll never do that again. I couldn't help but tense up as she slithered over, her long, slender body compressing into a bulbous form as she settled in front of me. This was going to take some getting used to. She smelled like rust and old lettuce, and I hoped she wasn't averse to baths now that she didn't have to hide anymore. 2 pointy legs protruded from her fur, and they poked around blindly until they found the plate. I watched in surprise as she split the pizza and slid half over to me, and I pushed it back. No, it's all for you, like Callum wanted. As I said this, my stomach growled, and Alesta chirped in response and slid half towards me again. She picked up a slice and began nibbling, and I smiled, teary-eyed, as I reached for my own slice. For the first time ever, I was glad I'd lost my job, and once I get a new one, neither of us will ever go hungry again. Alesta was making it quite difficult for me to season the ground beef as she kept winding around my legs, drooling. After tripping on her twice, I told her to stay out of the way if she wanted any of this chili. Her response was to stretch out and wrap herself around my body like a furry boa, her head leaning over my shoulder as she sniffed at the simmering pot. I couldn't help but chuckle as I braced myself under her weight. I held up a morsel of meat in front of her snout, and she gobbled it up with a happy chirp. She stuck out one of her pointy legs, poking blindly in search for more, and I tapped it with my spoon as I told her to be patient. She sighed and rested her large head on top of mine, her drool trickling down my face. I should invest in some goggles. I should invest in a lot of things, and I will, once I get a job. I glanced at my phone, dozens of applications a day, and not a single call or email for an interview. This economy was miserable. I was lucky I ended up in this apartment, where at least I didn't have to worry about food, as free meal prep boxes were delivered daily. I also didn't have to worry about security. Thanks to Alesta, the basics were covered, including much-needed companionship. But I wanted more for us, and I hoped the future would bring it. A knock on the door made us jump. I wasn't expecting anyone. I had no one to expect. While I stood there, frozen, Alesta slithered off me. I expected her to make a beeline to the cupboard to hide, but to my horror, she made her way to the door instead, chirping. I turned the stove off and ran after her, shushing her under my breath as another knock thudded against my door. Alesta didn't listen as she chirped again, and I cringed, hoping whoever was outside couldn't hear her.
Jory, I know you're in there.
My panic decreased slightly. That was Lita, the previous tenant of this apartment. That explained Alesta's familiarity. She probably thought that if she didn't need to hide from me anymore, then she didn't need to hide from the others who'd fed her. And that wasn't safe. All the tenants who lived here for the past 10 years had fed Alesta, unbeknownst to them. She knew them, but they didn't know her. I was the only one who had the pleasure of meeting her after she saved my life.
Jory, open up. I can see your shadow under the door.
Yeah, I'll be right there. I misplaced the keys. I didn't know Lita that well. We'd spoken face-to-face once and on the phone once. It wasn't that I found her shady, she was actually quite nice, but I didn't want to put Alesta in danger. Huffing and puffing, I dragged a wriggling Alesta to the bathroom and told her to remain quiet until I came back. She tilted her head in confusion, and I whispered sorry before I closed the bathroom door and ran towards the main one. Hey, hi, Lita, what's up? I said, leaning against the frame. My tense nonchalance didn't fool her as she squeezed past me and stood in the living room, her arms crossed. With a tight smile, I closed the door and joined her, my arms mirroring hers as I met her suspicious curiosity with concern. Is something wrong? It's true, isn't it? That story you wrote. My heart dropped. She read it. I winced in regret. I shouldn't have posted it on such a popular site. I also shouldn't have left in so many identifiable details. I omitted the address and altered names, but anyone who had lived here could easily recognize the rule. Isn't it? She stepped closer. Have you really been feeding a cryptid through the sink? I sputtered out an exaggerated laugh. No, of course not. I made it all up. Her eyes widened as her gaze fell behind me. Then what is that? I whipped around and my heart dropped to my feet as I saw Alesta making her way to her former roommate. When did she learn to open doors? I turned back to Lita in a panic, my arms spread, not sure who I should be shielding from the other as my thoughts whirred. It turned out I didn't have to shield anyone. Wow. Lita breathed in awe. She is real. I wasn't expecting a reaction, and I had no idea how to reply as I remained standing there like a discombobulated scarecrow. Lita didn't back away while Alesta slithered closer, but she did fall over when Alesta lurched her excited weight on her. I gasped and ran over, afraid Lita would start screaming, but instead, she began laughing as Alesta nuzzled her face. "I can't believe she's real." She sat up and hugged Alesta, whispering, "You were the one who stopped Donovan, weren't you? When he was drunk and banging on the bathroom door." Alesta gurgled, snuggling. Lita blinked back tears. "Thank you. He was so drunk he didn't remember what happened. He thought he fell down the stairs, but I knew it was my protector." My body twitched with adrenaline as my mind tried to keep up with this sudden turn of events. Lita knew about Alesta. That wasn't good. But Lita was grateful to her. That was good. Now what? "You won't tell anyone about her, will you?" Lita glanced up at me with a frown. "You already did that. You have any idea how stupid it was to post that story? Every person who's lived here now knows where to find her." "There's a chance they didn't read it." I fumbled for my phone and poked at its black screen before I ran to plug it in. "It hasn't been up for that long. I'll delete it the moment this piece of junk starts up." "That won't change anything. Once something's online, it's there forever. News will spread, and if someone comes for Alesta, their intentions might not be as good as ours. They could have weapons, tranquilizers, and backup." My panic restarted. "What should we do?" Lita stood up, thinking as she ran her hand over Alesta's head. "She can stay with me." I blinked, dumbfounded. "What?" "I owe her my life, too. I want her to be safe." "But I take good care of her." "How will you protect her if a bunch of guys barge in to trank her and take her away?" "She hides when there are strangers around, and I'll say I made up that story." "What if they start torturing you, and she comes out to protect you?" Despair wrung my heart. "And what if a previous tenant drops by, like I do, and she comes out to say hello?" I looked at Alesta, scouring my mind to find a way to steer the argument in my favor. I didn't want to lose her, but I did want to be safe, and time was of the essence. I wiped my nose on my sleeve, sniffling, and Alesta slid closer, stretching up and nuzzling my cheek in concern. Clinging onto my last thread of hope, I hugged her and turned to Lita. "Can you give me a loan? I'll move to a new place and take Alesta with me. And when I get a job, I'll pay you back, with interest." "Jory, I live paycheck to paycheck. I'm lucky I got out of the slums, but I'm not rolling in it." My shoulders slumped as reality siphoned all hope. I wasn't ready to tell Alesta goodbye, but didn't want my selfishness to put her at risk. I made the stupid mistake of posting that story, and now I must pay for it. Before I could admit defeat and give in, Lita spoke up. "You can come too." I frowned, not sure I heard right. "What?" "Just now, when I mentioned them torturing you, I realized they could still torture you for info if they find you here. This is your fault, but I don't want you getting hurt. You can both live with me until you find a job." I didn't know how many times I said thank you, but I couldn't stop until Lita told me to shut up. I promised to do all my chores and cook and clean, and she told me we'd figure out the details later. Right now, we had to figure out how to transport Alesta. She could stretch herself thin, but her mass remained the same. We debated whether or not it would look strange if we wrapped her around ourselves, but we nixed the idea when we feared she'd be recognized by anyone who read the story and was monitoring the building. Lita tossed her backpack on the floor and unzipped it, sighing as she wished Alesta could fit. Alesta sniffed around until she found the bag, and she curled up over it, crushing it beneath her. She then let out a strange howl that sounded like a foghorn with laryngitis, and Lita and I both gasped as Alesta began puking. Not just food. Everything. I put my hands over my mouth in horrified shock as vaguely familiar organs spewed from her mouth. Intestines, a liver. Was that a lung? Pieces of her centipede legs soon followed. I knew she retracted them when she wasn't using them, and I figured they were collapsible since she remained quite flexible, but I never imagined they were disposable, as they now lay atop a glistening pile of entrails. The more Alesta vomited, the more she appeared to shrink in size, and my jaw hung open in realization. Did she understand what we were trying to do? Was she trying so hard to please us that she was killing herself in order to fit inside the backpack? I turned to Lita, my fretful worry a stark contrast to her smile. "She's like a sea cucumber," she said, talking over Alesta's retching and hurling. I stared at her, baffled. "What?" "They throw up their insides to distract the enemy and then grow them back. Except she's throwing them up to get smaller." "She'll grow all that back?" I asked, hopeful as I pointed to the pile of innards. "I think so." As the grand finale, Alesta's teeth rained out of her mouth like ivory icicles, clinking against the cracked floor. She was now the size of a porcupine. She looked like one, too, with her abundant fur sticking up from all angles. Her skin must be insanely stretchy for it not to sag after a transformation like that. After licking her lips, Alesta nestled inside the backpack and chirped, pleased with herself. She was adorable, and Lita and I showered her with praise and pets before we looked at the glistening pile of refuse. We had to get rid of it. "Help me throw all this in the garbage disposal," I said, pulling my sleeves up. "The longer we stay here, the less safe it is for Alesta," Linda said, zipping up her backpack. "Especially with her small now." "We can't leave this here." She pulled out her phone, and a few seconds later, mine chirped. I walked over to where it was charging and saw she'd sent me a message, an address. "That's where I live. I'll go and take Alesta with me. You can clean up, grab all the stuff you need, and follow me." I nodded. "All right, I won't take long." Lita left, and I got to work dumping the slimy collection of guts, legs, and teeth into the garbage disposal. After I finished, I slung my bag on my back, dashing out of my apartment and racing down the stairs, only to crash into a large man on the sidewalk. The collision left us both reeling, and I stumbled back before I held up my hands in apology. The man glared at me as he picked up his fallen duffel bag, spewing curses in his guttural baritone. Not having time to waste, I apologized yet again before I ran off, his insults following me. After running for 6 more blocks, I stood at the bus stop and patted myself down, and my stomach dropped. My phone wasn't in my pocket. I checked my bag. It wasn't in there either. Did I forget it charging at home? Now I was the one cursing as I sprinted back 6 blocks and ran up the stairs. Wiping my sweat, I made my way to my apartment. And there, on the counter, was my phone, charging, Lita's message still on the lock screen. Relieved and irritated by my forgetfulness, I grabbed it and rushed back to the bus stop. Lita lived all the way across town, and it took me 3 buses to get there. Her building had an elevator, and I was grateful as I made my way to the 10th floor and knocked on her apartment door. When she didn't answer, I knocked again, worry gnawing at the corners of my mind. After a 3rd knock was met with silence, I called her. There was no answer. I texted her. No answer. I called again and again, one hand redialing while the other banged on the door. No answer. This couldn't be happening. I looked around in panic. Did she trick me? Was this not her address? Did she kidnap Alesta right in front of me, playing me for a fool? How did I not question her intentions? Why did I trust her so quickly? Why did I let her manipulate me with fear, build me with urgency, and prod me with emotion? How could she do this to me? How could she do this to Alesta? How could I do this to Alesta? The hallway spun as I cycled between heading to the elevators and returning to the door, my hands fidgeting to the confused chaos in my mind. Lita had been in there, and maybe I could ask the neighbors if they knew her. I should have taken a look at her car. The police could track her number. What if her phone was a burner? I could put out a missing persons report. Did I want to call the police when Alesta was involved? Alesta. My heart shivered as I imagined her scared and trapped inside Lita's bag. What was Lita going to do to her? Sell her? Experiment on her? Open up a supernatural zoo? Charge people to watch her do tricks? Eat her? The worse my thoughts got, the more agitated I became. My fretful eyes roaming the hall as though they expected a solution to materialize from the wallpaper. I needed fresh air. I couldn't think in this suffocating lie. Unable to wait for the elevator, I ran down 10 flights of stairs and flung myself out the sidewalk, panting, sweat soaking my shirt. I was panting so hard, I almost didn't hear my phone ring. The moment I saw Lita's number, I swiped the screen and smashed it against my ear. Where are you?
This is the lowest I've ever seen you.
Lita said in disgust, a car engine rumbling in the background. I bristled in offense and fury. Where the hell are you? I clambered up as a guttural baritone replied from a distance. Once I find what's under that rubble, you'll be sorry you ever doubted me. What was Duffel Bag Guy doing with Lita? Were they in on this together? Why was she calling me?
Why are you so obsessed with Ardell Mansion?
Lita asked, enunciating more than usual.
It's been picked clean. There's nothing there.
There is,
the man said.
and that thing is going to find it for me.
Thing? Did he mean Alesta?
There's nothing there, Donovan.
Donovan, as in drunk Donovan, who Alesta attacked to save Lita.
There is,
He said.
and we're not leaving until it finds it.
And if we find something, then what?
The engine rumbled in the uncomfortable silence.
Donovan, and then what?
You'll find out.
You know, all I have to do is scream right now, and Alesta will attack you.
You do that, and your photos go straight to your boss.
Donovan growled.
Okay, look, how about this? You let us both go once you find whatever you find, and I won't turn you in for violating your restraining order and blackmailing me to force me to keep Alesta from tearing you to pieces.
You'll never turn me in, because you know if you do, I won't cancel the scheduled email for those pics.
You sick bastard. You know, Alesta spared your drunk ass that day because you used to feed her. She could have easily killed you and ate you all up, but she didn't. She had mercy. Where's yours?
Mercy is a weakness.
I can't believe I used to date you.
Lita grumbled.
How did you even find out where I lived?
I still have the key to our old place. The idiot that moved in after you didn't bother to change the locks. I didn't find the monster or the idiot, but I saw your address on their phone.
Damn it, Jory.
Lita whispered before the line went dead. The silent phone stayed pressed to my ear as I stared at the sidewalk, trying to put together the pieces of Lita's calculated dialogue. Donovan, Lita's abusive ex, had kidnapped Lita and Alesta and was driving them to Ardell Mansion, and he was blackmailing Lita to ensure she wouldn't sick Alesta on him. And it was my fault he found them. It was my fault all of this was even happening in the first place. Everyone's fate after Donovan finds what he wants was still a mystery. A mystery I wasn't interested in finding out. I had to help, right now. We couldn't call the police without Donovan running his mouth about Alesta and exposing something Lita wanted hidden. I didn't know anyone I trusted enough to ask for advice or help. I had to go to Ardell Mansion alone. I just had to find it. A quick search on my phone told me it used to be popular with explorers and looters before the police sealed it off. It was an hour away, and the rattling change in my wallet wasn't going to be enough. I was going to have to hitchhike. Hopefully, that goes off without a hitch. Hopefully, if Lita was right and the mansion was picked clean, they might still be there, empty-handed, by the time I arrive. Hopefully, I would have come up with a plan by then. I hadn't. An hour later, I was waving goodbye to a friendly farmer as I jogged from his truck to the crumbling mansion looming ahead. What was I going to do? I had no weapon. I had no backup. I had no idea what Donovan was capable of. Would he kill them? Keep them prisoners to do his bidding? Ducking beneath police tape and squeezing through a hole in the chain-link fence, I inched my way to the nearest entrance. My heart drummed against my ribs, sneaking through a broken door. I held my breath as the musty humidity coated my skin, my eyes and ears on high alert. Echoes. I heard echoes of an argument between Lita and Donovan. Fearing I'd get noticed if I turned on my phone's flashlight, I stumbled through the dark instead, as I made my way towards them. The closer I got, the more heated their argument became, spurring my pulse as I hoped things wouldn't get out of hand.
"She's already found you a fortune. What more do you want?"
Lita yelled.
"There's more in there. I know it," Donovan said. "Send it back."
"She went back 5 times already. There's nothing else."
"Send it back, or I'm not canceling the email."
"You heartless pig. She's blind. She did the best she could. She's exhausted. Look at her."
"It can rest once it finds more. Tell it to go back in and squeeze further down, now."
My eyes picked up a faint light from a room up ahead, and I tiptoed towards it, the argument getting louder and clearer. With a tense breath, I peeked in, my throat dry with nerves and dust. Donovan and Lita were standing inside an enormous library under a halo of floating dust, illuminated by his flashlight. Bare, broken shelves lined the wall, top to bottom, except for the wall at the far end. That one had been reduced to rubble, and that was the one Donovan seemed interested in finding what was beneath it. His back was to me, his light focused on Lita's face, neither of them aware of my presence as they yelled at each other. I craned my neck as I squinted at the shadows, but I couldn't make out Alesta. Where was she? My worry overriding my fear, I tiptoed closer, hoping the bickering two couldn't hear the debris grinding under my shoes or the frantic heart rattling in my chest. Donovan's light shifted, and I gasped and ducked behind a toppled armchair, clamping my hand over my mouth as a rat scuttled out of its tattered fabric. He cursed at the rodent and went back to arguing with Lita, and I let out a quivering sigh of relief. Testing my luck, I peeked around the armchair, and joy soothed my frazzled mind. Alesta was sniffing the air as she slithered towards me. She knew I was here. It was so strange seeing her that size, and I clenched my jaw when I saw the thick layer of dust and filth coating her onyx fur. Donovan really was a heartless pig.
"No. You know what? How about this?" Lita snapped. "You cancel the email and delete the pics, or I'll scream."
"You do that, and your boss will get your photos."
"And you'll be dead. I'm counting to 3. 1.
"You're bluffing."
2.
"Lita."
I held my breath. Was she actually going to do it?
3.
I jumped as Lita's scream filled the room, and Alesta turned her head towards the noise, her ears perked up in concern. Donovan turned around too, and I gasped as he whipped out a gun. There was no hesitation as he aimed it at Alesta, and there was no hesitation as I dashed out from behind the armchair.
A gunshot rang, and Lita's scream filled the room again as I crashed to the floor, the hot sting in my arm mutating to searing pain. After a second of mind-numbing shock, I scrambled to my knees, clutching my injured limb as I tried to shield Alesta again. But she wasn't waiting for me, and my heart dropped as she slithered past me and charged at Donovan. He aimed his gun again, and I cried out for him to stop, but he couldn't hear me above Alesta's ear-splitting screeches. Lita kicked the back of his leg, and his bullet missed its mark, and he fell to his knees. I tensed up as they began wrestling for the gun, but the three of us soon forgot all about it when Alesta spat out a jet of red fluid. Donovan got the brunt of it, and he wailed as he held his hands to his sizzling face. Steam curled around his neck. Lita stumbled away, shaking the liquid off of her blistered hand as we both stared in terrified shock at Alesta. With her fur puffed and toothless gums bared, she was an unrestrained force, weaving around Donovan as she continued to spit acid at him, drops flying around the room. As Donovan shrieked and writhed, his skin melted off his liquefying bones. Lita ran over to me, both of us wincing as wayward droplets burned through our clothes. Ducking behind the armchair, we hugged each other as we listened to Donovan's tortured caterwauling, our rapid pulses in sync. I thought Alesta's centipede form was terrifying, but this type of unbridled fury was something else. This wasn't only protection. This was hate. Was it because he shot at her? Was it because he shot me? Was it because she felt betrayed by the man who used to feed her? Was it because both Lita and I were in distress because of him? Was it all of the above? After a few agonizing minutes, Alesta stopped screeching, and the silence hung heavy in the metallic air. Trembling, Lita and I peeked above the armchair, and my stomach lurched at the sight of Donovan, or what was left of him. A bloody puddle of dissolved guts and bone, scraps of fabric, half a shoe, an ear, and a couple of fingers. After prying my disturbed gaze away from the mess, I saw Alesta sniffing the air, trying to locate us. She seemed wary, swaying as she cocked her ears and tilted her head in concentration. I met Lita's eyes, and we nodded. Alesta seemed to have calmed down. It was safe to approach her.
Alesta, we're here,
I said, crawling out from behind the armchair. She gurgled and slithered over, her tired breaths wheezing. We held our arms out for a hug, only to find ourselves waiting as she stopped and began licking her fur. Lita said she was probably cleaning off any acid residue, and I found that touchingly considerate. After making sure she couldn't accidentally hurt us, she slid right into our hugs, and we held her tight as she nuzzled us in concern. We thanked her and assured her we were all right, drowning her in love and praise as she chirped in our arms and licked our faces. While Alesta snuggled, I looked at Lita with a regretful frown, and she shook her head in mild irritation. "What kind of moron forgets their phone at home?" she whispered. "I'm sorry. I know all of this is my fault." I looked at her hand. "How badly are you hurt?" She inspected the smattering of blisters. "I've had worse." She turns to my arm. "We've got to stop the bleeding." I took off my canvas belt, and she got to work wrapping my wound as Alesta poked her nose at it in curiosity. After cinching the belt and making me wince, Lita sat back with a sigh, eyeing the Donovan puddle. "I'm sorry about the photos, whatever that's about," I said. Lita studied the puddle in silence for a few more seconds before she stood up and crossed the room. After grabbing the gun and a familiar duffel bag, she began inspecting Donovan's remains, and I puked in my mouth as she used the weapon to fish out 2 fingers. I watched in horrified disgust as she rinsed them with water from the bag and dried them on her shirt, her determined expression stony. Alesta squirmed in my arms, drooling as she sniffed towards the puddle, and I held her tighter. "Let her eat. She's starving," Lita said, walking over to sit beside me again. "No, I don't want her to get used to eating human flesh." "Why? She's helping clean up, and she's getting nutrition. And Donovan's a lot of nutrition." "Because she lives with humans. It's like me being a French fry. There'll eventually be a point where the temptation to eat me becomes too much." A chuckle cracked her hard expression. "Didn't know you had a sense of humor." "I don't. I mean, I do, but I was being serious." "Just let her eat for now." She pulled a phone out of the duffel bag. "And let me focus." I stared in disbelief as she began testing Donovan's severed digits on the fingerprint sensor. To my baffled surprise, one of them actually worked, and Lita smiled as she began scrolling. Realizing the futility of her squirming, Alesta leaned her head against my chest and whined like a sad puppy. And I broke. We could work out the rules later. She chirped and I let her go, and I watched with a resigned sigh as she slurped up Donovan, her body rippling with each gulp. A few minutes later, Lita tossed the phone back in the duffel bag with a triumphant smile. "And that's that." "You deleted the photos?" "Yes, and canceled the scheduled email." "That's awesome. That was clever, using his finger. And gross." "I did what I had to. It took me forever to secure that job." With my adrenaline dwindling, the pain was becoming aggressive, and I winced as I held my arm. Lita shifted closer and checked the belt, a gentleness softening her face. "That was pretty cool, what you did, protecting Alesta like that," she said. "I'd do it again in a heartbeat." "I'm sorry. I didn't know he had a gun. I wouldn't have screamed. I'm really glad you were there. Not glad you were shot, of course, just that, you know." "I know." "We should get you to a hospital." I sighed. "Great. More debt." "Maybe these'll help." She reached into the bag and tossed a tiny leather pouch at me, and I opened it. "What are these? Pennies?" I asked, pouring the dozen coins in my palms. "They look like pennies, but not like any I've seen before. Donovan said they're worth a fortune." "Is he an expert?" I gasped, chuckling. "Whoa, hey, Alesta." Alesta had slithered over, now 7 times larger, and dumped her weight on me, nearly making me drop the coins. She sniffed at them and grunted, and Lita laughed as she collected them back in their pouch. "Don't worry, Alesta. You'll never have to search for stuff like that ever again." Lita stood up and slung the duffel bag on her shoulder before reaching down. "Need a hand there, French fry?" "Very funny," I said, accepting her help as I got to my feet. Alesta wrapped herself around my body, and I staggered, my injury not helping with her weight. Nonetheless, I was ready to carry her, but Lita reached out, calling her over. Alesta chirped and stretched out, curling around Lita and binding us together for a few seconds before she released me. Adjusting my shirt, I nodded, and the 3 of us made our way to Donovan's car. "Good morning. I'd like to know how much these coins are worth." "You think I got time for stupid jokes? Get the hell out of my store." I'd come to expect that reaction, even though I hoped this time would be different. That was the 5th pawn shop today where no one took me seriously, and I had no idea why. Lita didn't have much luck the past few days either. Standing on the sidewalk, I studied the 12 coins in my palm, frowning. They looked like pennies, but instead of Abe's profile, there was a double helix like a strand of DNA. There was text, too. Nos unum sumos. Lita and I looked it up.
It meant we are one in Latin. The other side of the coin only had a Celtic type of knot inside the circle. No text. I found them intriguing, but every person so far had acted as though I was showing them bottle caps. Maybe Donovan was wrong about them being worth a fortune. Maybe they were just arcade tokens or board game money. I poured the coins back into their pouch with a sigh, trying to accept the fact that we may not get rich off them after all. "Excuse me." I turned around to face a man built like a tank, and I took a few nervous steps back. I remembered him from the pawn shop, standing next to me with a dagger he was interested in buying. I didn't know why he was standing next to me now, and I hoped he didn't buy the dagger. Yes, I said with a frown. "I overheard you at the pawn shop. These places aren't experts in currency. They see what looks like a penny and dismiss it immediately. I recognize the coins, though." My hope and suspicion clashed. Really? "Yes, there's Latin on them, correct? Nos unum sumus." My hope took over. Yes, do you know how much they're worth?" "I don't, personally, but I know a store that does." "Thank you, man. We've been trying for days to find out." His mustache bristled over his smile. "My pleasure." He gave me an address that was within walking distance, and I jogged over right away, calling Lita to let her know the good news. The shop looked run down on the outside, and it didn't look much better on the inside. In fact, it seemed abandoned, empty shelves and dust everywhere. Hello?" I walked further in, the coin pouch clutched tightly in my fist. "Is anyone here?" "I am." I jumped at the familiar voice and turned around to find myself once again facing the man built like a tank. "Oh, hey," I said with a shaky chuckle. "Is this the right place?" "It is," he replied, blocking the door with his bulk and crossing his tree-trunk arms. "Where did you get those coins?" I gulped and backed away. I knew this was too good to be true. I shouldn't have come here. Was he a cop or a thief? Either way, I definitely wasn't telling him we took the coins from a kidnapper who'd forced Lita and Alesta to find them inside a mansion sealed off by cops before he shot me and was dissolved and eaten by Alesta. "Where did you get those coins?" he repeated with impatience. Are you a cop?" "No." My stomach dropped. Look, man, if you want them, take them." I threw the pouch at his feet. "I don't want any trouble. Please, just let me leave. I won't tell anyone about this." He reached down for it. "You're not going anywhere until you tell me where you got these." I inherited them. I don't have any money. I got $5 in my wallet. You can have that too, but please, let me go." "Stop lying to me." "I'm not lying," I said, as I took a step back, looking around in distress for an escape route. I didn't get much time to find out before he grabbed my arm, the one in a sling. I cried out and cried out again as he yanked me towards him, his coffee breath hot as he growled in my face. "You tell me where you got those, right now." "God, please, I was shot in that arm." He squeezed. "I'll do a lot worse if you don't tell me where you got those." The pain pierced down to the bone, and I gasped. "I inherited them, I swear." I screamed as he wrestled me to the floor and twisted my arm behind my back. "You tell me the truth, or I'm going to pry it out of you one fingernail at a time," he said, pulling out the dagger he apparently did buy. Dust flew as my rapid breaths puffed against the grimy floorboards. This was the third time in 2 weeks I found myself flat on the floor against my will. Why did I come here?
Why was I so desperate to get out of poverty that I risked my safety like this? The blade burrowed beneath my pinky's nail, and I lost all my resolve as I broke down, only having enough sense to omit Lita and Alesta from the equation.
I found them. Where? The Ardell Mansion. What were you doing there? Exploring. How many cryptids were there?
I froze, my eyes wide in startled trepidation. How did he know about cryptids? Why was he mentioning them? Was he a cryptid hunter? Anxiety prodded my frantic heart as responsibility set in. No matter what he did to me, I wasn't going to let him know about Alesta. What? Cryptids aren't real. He didn't say anything, his blade speaking for him as it ripped off my pinky nail. I screamed, writhing beneath him, and my struggling amplified as he moved to my ring finger. Tell me the truth. How many cryptids were there?
None.
Where is the Ardell Mansion? I gave him the address, and he got up and yanked me to my feet. We're going there together.
Oh, please, let me go.
I pleaded, trembling as my arm throbbed and pinky seared.
Take the coins, I don't care.
He didn't listen, and I soon found myself stripped of my phone and handcuffed inside his solid metal trunk. I shouted for help as I kicked and thrashed, but all that did was leave me hoarse and sweat-soaked. An hour later, the engine stopped, and I winced as the man dragged me out. He shoved me inside the crumbling mansion and ordered me to show him where I found the coins, and I led him to the collapsed wall in the library.
There. Where there?
I nodded at the rubble.
Under there.
He narrowed his eyes in suspicion.
How did you get them out?
I grimaced internally. The kidnapper had forced Lita to tell Alesta to squeeze under there to get them. I definitely wasn't telling this guy that. Why did I lead him here? I could have taken him to any room and lied. Why did I keep burying myself deeper and deeper? He grabbed my injured arm.
How did you get them out? I used a robot.
He glared at me.
A robot? Yeah, like a remote-controlled one, with pincers to grab things.
He didn't believe me. I didn't even believe me. What was I thinking?
The more you lie, the worse things will get for you. I don't know what you want from me. I want to know where the cryptids are. But cryptids aren't real.
I grunted as he punched me in the gut, and I curled up, wheezing as I dropped to my knees, my cheek pressed against the musty, threadbare carpet.
This is just a taste of what I can do to...
His threat hung unfinished in the dusty air, and my panicked gaze darted around as I wondered what he was doing. He got up off me, and my heart rattled in my chest as he dragged me to a dim area of the room. The closer we got, the stronger a herbal scent became, and I cowered in the corner after he flung me against the wall and crouched down to my level. I kept my eyes glued to his infuriated expression, but his attention was on a pale shard beside him. He picked it up, running his fingers along its edges before taking a deep whiff, and I stared in anxious bewilderment. What was he doing? He turned to me, fuming, and I gulped, hoping this time his mouth would speak instead of his fist.
A broken plate?
I replied, my hesitant voice shaking. He flared his nostrils, and I flinched as he spat.
Do you know what it's made of? Ceramic?
I replied in a meek croak. He stared at me, his barely contained anger twitching under his skin, and I braced myself for its eruption. To my surprise, he took a deep breath instead. attempting to control his temper as he looked down at the shard. Durlusk bones smell of sage. A cryptid was killed for this. It's a trophy. His steady gaze settled on me. You told me a lot of lies today, but you wouldn't have brought me here if you had something to do with this savagery. I nodded and shook my head at the same time, hopeful. Yes, no, I don't know anything. You found all 12 coins here, correct? Yes, I did. The person who lived here must have been a serial killer. A hunter who targeted cryptectors and their cryptids, keeping trophies of each. I jumped as he spewed a string of profanities and punched the wall, his knuckles bleeding. He closed his eyes, and a few tense seconds later, he regained his composure. What did you say this place was called? The Ardell Mansion, I replied, wary of his unstable mood. He squinted in thought. Ardell. Haven't heard of that. I'll have to do some research. His disquieting gaze scanned the library. And I'll be tearing this place apart to find more trophies. So, can I go now? He turned back to me. Not until you stop lying about the cryptids. I'm not. I didn't find any here. But you've bonded with one. My heart dropped. How did he know? No. I don't know what you're talking about. He pulled a coin out of the pouch and held it up to my face. These can only be seen by those who've bonded with a cryptid. Others seek blank discs. You aren't a cryptector, or you would have known that. But you fed, sheltered, or protected a cryptid. I didn't think my eyes could get any wider. Who was this guy? Was he telling the truth about these coins? What was a cryptector? Who are you? I asked. I'm a cryptector. We train certain types of cryptids to help us protect cryptids, animals, and humans in the wild. He twirled the coin between his fingers. We each have one coin per trained cryptid under our care. It's how we identify each other. You protect cryptids? I asked in disbelief. Yes. My resentment simmered. Why didn't you start with that? Instead of holding me captive and beating me up, you ripped my nail out. You were lying. I thought you were a robber or a hunter going after cryptids or something. I am going after cryptids. One missing cryptid. He looked at the shard of Durlust bone in his hand. I just hope Razor wasn't a victim of this savagery. My resentment mellowed. I wasn't expecting an emotion from him other than anger, especially not one that seemed personal. Who's Razor? I asked. A cryptid under my care. She went missing about a decade ago on one of our rounds through the forest. I'm sorry. It was my fault. I had to take an injured Walgus to our clinics, so I let Razor complete the rounds herself. She's a Zent, one of the most powerful cryptids, like a blend between a viper, wolf, and a centipede. I didn't think anything could happen to her, until she didn't return. My jaw hung open. Razor sounded a lot like Alesta, though I described her more like a giant caterpillar puppy. He said Razor went missing about 10 years ago. That was around the same time Callum found Alesta, after she nearly died protecting him from a bear. Could Alesta be Razor? The man frowned at my dazed expression. What are you gawking for? I was just imagining how awesome Razor must look. Viper, wolf, and caterpillar.
Centipede.
Centipede, sorry. Yeah. I gasped as he grabbed my shirt and pulled me closer, his intense eyes reading my fretful ones.
You've seen her, haven't you? Is she the cryptid you bonded with?
He shook me, snarling.
Where is she?
My restless thoughts floundered along with my heart as I tried to figure out the right course of action, but the man had no patience for my silence panicking. He pulled out his dagger, and I gasped again as he held it to my ear.
I'm going to slice off one body part every time I ask the question. Where is Razor?
Safe. She's safe, I cried out, shaking with tension as I felt the blade press against my skin.
Where?
Please, I yelped as he twitched the dagger. She lives with me. She saved my life, and I saved hers. We're friends.
Were you the one who took her?
No, some guy called Callum did. She got hurt after protecting him from a bear he provoked, and he felt bad and took care of her. But he was dying from cancer, so he pre-ordered 10 years of meal prep boxes and left a note for anyone renting the apartment after him to cook and leave the food for her.
You expect me to believe that?
I swear. And she was hiding the entire time. No one knew what they were feeding, but when I was renting, a robber almost killed me, and she came out of the sink and saved me. I've been caring for her ever since. He eased up on the knife.
You're serious?
I nodded, trembling. I love Alesta. She's amazing, and I treat her really well. He wrinkled his nose.
You named her Alesta?
No, Callum did. It means protector.
Her name is Razor, and she belongs with me. Take me to her.
I wasn't ready for this. I didn't want to make the wrong choice. It also wasn't just my choice to make. Alesta and I lived in Lita's apartment, and Lita cared about her as much as I did. I needed time to think, but it seemed unlikely this man would be patient enough for that. How can you be so sure she's Razor and not another Zint? I asked.
Zent. And I'll know when I see her. She'll recognize me too. We've been partners for 15 years.
He pulled me up to my feet and dragged me behind him as he walked to his car.
What's your address?
Things were moving too fast. Too much information, not enough time to process it. I couldn't make this decision now. I needed a few minutes and my freedom, which meant I had to stay on the good side of this guy's mercurial mood. It's amazing you finally found her after 10 years, I said, stumbling along behind him. But I don't feel comfortable giving my address to a stranger. If you drop me off at the nearest bus stop, I can meet you back here with the Razor.
Not happening.
Why not?
I don't trust you.
Well, I don't trust you either. I told you how I've been caring for Razor. I even took a bullet for her, yet you're still treating me like an enemy.
Because you've done nothing but lie to me.
Not after I knew who you were and how much Razor meant to you.
I had to threaten to slice your ear off to get you to spill.
We got to his car, and he popped open the trunk.
Give me the address and get in.
No, and I only lied because I was afraid. You have a temper and a weapon and are 5 times my size. If you'd just given me a few minutes to let the information settle, I'd have told you everything.
Giving people a few minutes means giving them time to make up a lie.
Well, you didn't even give me a few seconds. The truth is she's safe and happy, and I'm thankful I met you and finally know her past. I've been trying my best to take care of her, and you have the knowledge and experience I lack. I care about her and want what's best for her. I owe her that. He studied me, his mustache twitching to the rhythm of the thoughts behind his eyes. I held his gaze with an earnest expression. I'd chosen my words perfectly. All true, yet flexible enough to be misinterpreted. I wasn't giving up Alesta that easy, but he didn't need to know that. My face fell as he pulled my phone out of his pocket, and I sighed in relief when he grumbled at its dead screen. For the first time, I was thankful it was a piece of junk. I was still in control of the information he wanted. I just hoped he'd be reasonable for once instead of violent.
What's your name?
He asked.
Jory. All right, Jory. I've waited 10 years to find Razor. I can wait another day. That's how long you have to let the information settle and bring Razor here.
I nodded in elated gratitude.
Yes, okay, thank you. I'm going against my better judgment because I want to believe Razor has been in good hands. But if you're not here with her by this time tomorrow, or if you call the police, then you can consider yourself dead.
I gulped. I understand.
Cryptectors have skills and connections. Don't make me use them to hunt you down.
I won't. He uncuffed me before pulling out a pen and writing on my palm.
That's my burner phone. Call me if anything changes.
I nodded, rubbing my abraded wrists as I read the scrawled numbers. Of course, for sure. What's your name?
You can call me Yurik.
I blinked. Yurik, like the jester from Hamlet. He shot me a venomous glare.
Excuse me?
No, nothing, I quickly said. Can I have my phone back? He slammed the trunk shut and threw my phone back at me.
I'm keeping the coins.
I nodded. Yeah, sure. No problem.
Get in the car.
I did as I was told, and he dropped me off at the nearest bus stop. I didn't go home, though. I was afraid he'd track me there. I borrowed a phone charger from a cafe and called Lita instead. She was at work, but she wanted to know everything. So I typed this out and posted it. We need advice. Alesta's quality of life depends on it. I just called Yurik, I said through the phone, my voice and body shaking with lingering tension and relief. He's agreed to give me an extra day.
That's great,
Lita said. I fell back on the creaky motel bed. Yeah, but we aren't any closer to deciding what we should do.
Let's go over the facts again. 1. Alesta was excited when she smelled your shirt, so that could have been because Yurik's scent wasn't strong enough and she was just smelling you.
Okay. 2. Yurik let me go so I could get Alesta to him, but he probably did that so he could track me. And he gave me this extra day because he's hoping I'd leave this motel and go to Alesta.
Alright. 3. Alesta never tried looking for Yurik, but who knows where Callum found her. Could have been miles away, and she's blind. It's not like she's going to roam around the city lost looking for him.
I sighed in irritation. These facts are getting us nowhere. What if she ran away from him on purpose? What if she really does miss him? She can't exactly tell us.
Are the commenters still saying we shouldn't trust him?
Yeah, they're thinking he's lying or hiding something. I put Lita on speaker and opened the app where I posted my stories. The latest comment suggests we... Hang on, I got a DM. I jolted upright as I read the message. I hope this sees you on time. Don't trust Yurik. We know him, and we know what he wants with Alesta. We read your 3 posts and want to help keep her and you safe. My wife and I will be at the Quail Quill Cafe at 2 p.m. Meet us there if you would like our help. I will be wearing a yellow scarf. Clark.
What is it?
Lita asked. I read the message aloud to her.
Well, that's intriguing. Who's Clark?
I don't know. I checked his profile. It looks like he opened a new account just to send me this. How do they know I can meet them at the Quail Quill Cafe?
They're probably familiar with the Ardell mansion and picked a cafe nearby. I wonder what they know about Yorick.
How do we know they aren't also after Alesta?
We don't, but at least they're asking to meet in a public place. And they didn't ask you to bring Alesta.
Why can't they tell me about Yorick online? I typed out a reply. I just asked them what they know. A few minutes later, Lita asked.
Did they respond?
Not yet.
It's almost 2. I think you should go and see what they have to say, and keep me on the line.
Don't you want to come with me?
I wish, but I already had my lunch break.
After freshening up, I took the bus over to the Quail Quill Cafe, with Lita on the phone in my pocket. I walked through the doors, hoping she'd be able to hear everything. I scanned the area for a yellow scarf, and found it wrapped around a middle-aged man's neck. Taking a deep breath, I approached him, and he smiled at me.
Are you Jory?
I nodded. Clark.
Yes, please have a seat.
I hesitated. You said you were with your wife.
He is,
A cheerful lady said as she walked over with 4 cups of coffee.
I thought I'd get us all a hot drink while we chat.
She sat down beside Clark.
I'm Carol, and we have a lot to tell you.
Where's Lita? Clark asked as I took a seat across from them. At work, I replied. Why'd you want to see me in person? We actually wanted you to see this. It's easier to trust someone face to face. And we need you to trust us for your safety. What do you mean? Carol slid a cup over to me.
You're lucky to be alive. Yorick is a very dangerous man.
Dangerous how? I asked, taking the coffee with a wary glance.
He told you he was a cryptector. He isn't. We are.
Clark gestured to Carol and himself. We're part of an organization that protects cryptids from those who run underground cryptid fighting rings. Underground what?
Have you heard of cockfights?
I nodded.
It's similar, but with cryptids, and much more violent. They fight to the death.
Yorick was the champion of one of the rings we shut down. He was Alesta's master, and she was unbeatable. Yorick made Alesta fight other cryptids to the death? I asked in shock.
Yes, for the money,
Carol said.
and he made a lot.
Clark sighed, nursing his coffee.
When we shut them down, a lot of cryptids escaped, and most of the masters went into hiding. We've been trying to locate both for a long time. We found the majority of the cryptids, but the rest we believe have been captured and made to fight in a new ring. We believe Yorick is after Alesta to regain his former glory. It is possible other masters have read your posts and are interested in Alesta as well.
I didn't know what to say as I stared at them, my mouth hanging open.
We want to help,
Carol said.
We have a wonderful sanctuary for cryptids at the Cryptector headquarters, and you, Lita, and Alesta can stay with us until we find the new ring, shut it down, and capture all the masters, including Yorick.
That's... wow. I tried to gather my staggering thoughts. Yorick was tough, but he seemed genuinely upset when he found that cryptid bone trophy. And the Cryptector coins that can only be seen by those who bond with cryptids. How do you explain how he can see them?
Oh, sweetheart, he lied about everything,
Carol said with a sad smile.
Those aren't Cryptector coins. They're coins for cryptid masters. They have 1 per cryptid they train to fight.
And Yorick wasn't upset that a cryptid was killed, Clark said.
He was afraid he'd find Alesta's bones too.
I looked down at my hands, my thoughts in turmoil.
I couldn't believe I fell for Yorick's lies like that. I couldn't believe he forced Alesta to fight to the death for sport. I couldn't believe I managed to make it out alive after he captured me. I sat up at an idea. Wait, Yorick's going to meet me tomorrow at noon at the Ardell Mansion. You guys can catch him there and make him tell you where the new ring is. Right, yes, we read that in your post, and we've set up a plan to capture him, Clark said. But until then, we need you to be safe. We can take you right now to pick up Lita, Alesta, and any necessities before we head to the Cryptector headquarters. I hesitated. I appreciate that, but is it possible to give me your address instead? We can meet you there. Of course, Carol said, pulling out a pen and grabbing a napkin. But please, don't tell anyone, not even your supporters online. I nodded, relieved. Thank you. And we won't. Don't worry. She handed me the napkin. I wrote our number too. If anything happens, call us right away. We will. Thank you, ma'am, sir. Oh, call us Clark and Carol, she said, smiling as they both got to their feet. We hope to see you soon. Please be careful. We will, I said, standing up and shaking their hands. Thank you again. I really appreciate it. Our duty and pleasure. We walked out of the cafe together, and I stood beside their SUV as they got in. Just as I was about to pull out my phone to talk to Lita, a familiar, gruff voice turned my blood to ice. Jory. I turned towards Yorick in horror. He was stomping across the street towards me, his face red, his eyes wild, his fists clenched. I froze, my stomach, arm, and pinky throbbing as they reminded me of what was bound to happen if he got his hands on me. Get in, Clark yelled. My body acted on its own as it leapt inside the back seat, slamming the door shut just as Yorick slammed his body into it. I gasped and slid away, grateful for the locks as my heart thundered in my chest.
You stay away from them.
He roared, pounding his giant fist against the window.
Get out, or I'll...
I had no idea what he was going to threaten me with, because Carol hit the gas. The tires squealed as we peeled away. I turned to look back, and my gut twisted when I saw him yanking someone off their motorcycle before straddling it. This was just like a movie, except this wasn't going to end with bloopers, unless it was my life flashing before my eyes. Yorick was bellowing, but I couldn't hear him over the honking and screeching as Carol attempted to lose him through the crowded streets. He pulled out a gun, and I gasped and ducked, yelling warnings to the couple as I tensed up in anticipation. Hang on, Carol said, swerving to the left. Don't you want to capture him? I asked, pinballing in the back seat. She swerved right. We don't have backup. We weren't anticipating this. He must be tracking you, Clark said, grabbing the handle as the SUV leaned dangerously. He has your phone, doesn't he? Yes, I said, my knuckles white as I gripped the seat for dear life. Throw it out. Throw my phone? Yes. He opened the window. Toss it, quick. I fumbled with my phone and hurled it out, wincing as it cracked against the sidewalk. Carol swerved again, cursing as she nearly hit a pedestrian, and I turned back, my pulse stuttering, as I waited for Yorick to pop up. He did. I gave the distressing news to the couple, and Carol cursed again, weaving as she tried to lose him. Hang on, she yelled. I gasped as she took a sharp turn inside a building's parking lot. She turned off the engine, and we sat in silence, my frantic heart thudding, our wide eyes glued to the road. A few seconds later, Yorick zoomed by one of the motorcycles. We lost him. We did it. My tension melted, and so did my muscles as I collapsed on the seat, trembling. That was close. Too close. If it wasn't for Clark and Carol, I would have been Yorick's punching bag, and worse.
Thank you,
I whispered, my voice quivering.
thank you.
Don't mention it.
Carol looked back at me.
Are you all right?
Shaken up, but alive, thanks to you.
It's not over yet, and now we can be certain he won't be waiting for you at the Ardell Mansion tomorrow. He's going to hunt you down. We need to get you, Lita, and Alesta to safety as soon as possible. I nodded, sitting up. I need to call Lita. After borrowing their phone, I updated Lita, apologizing for throwing her out the window during the chase. I gave her the address and asked her to bring Alesta and meet us there as soon as possible. She said she'd be right there, and I hung up, thanking the couple yet again. It took us over an hour to make it to the address. It was a house in the middle of nowhere. They said it used to be their old headquarters before they had to upgrade due to an increase in rescued cryptids. Their new location was secret, but once Lita and Alesta met us here, the couple would drive us over. We sat on the weathered porch, and I asked for their phone to call Lita again. It turned out I didn't need to, as her dented car bounced its way up the unpaved road. I ran over, and I frowned when she got out, alone. "Where's Alesta?" I asked.
Somewhere safe, she replied, slamming the door. I want to see the Cryptector headquarters first.
But Yorick is after her.
He won't find her.
Young lady, we're dealing with a very dangerous man, Clark said, walking over. We don't have time for this.
I just want to see it. If I feel comfortable, I'll get Alesta.
It's not just your choice, it's mine too, I said. These guys saved my life, and they've saved many cryptids' lives. Now they want to help us save Alesta's.
I get it, but we just met them. I want to make sure they're legit.
Carol chuckled.
Oh, sweetheart, are you always this distrustful?
Yes, and don't call me sweetheart. It's Lita. Well, Lita, Clark said. Looks like you've got us in a tight spot. I gasped as he grabbed my hair and pulled my head back, his gun digging into my temple, spurring my heart and confusion. What was going on? Tell us where you have Alesta, he said, his voice cold and steady. Lita backed away, eyes wide with shock, and Carol grabbed her arm.
Oh no, you're staying right here, sweetheart. Tell us where Alesta is, and no one gets hurt.
What are you guys doing?
I asked through fretful breaths. We just want Alesta.
I trusted you.
That was your mistake. Now where is she?
I'm not telling you anything,
Lita said, clenching her jaw. We'd agreed to sacrifice ourselves for Alesta, and I squeezed my eyes shut, trembling as I anticipated a bullet going through my skull. Piercing gunfire sounded, and I screamed, my heart ricocheting in my chest as Clark shot a cluster of bullets into Lita's tires instead. Not a second later, Clark began screaming as well, and I jerked away with a gasp as my ears sizzled with a rash of searing pain. Clark had let go of me, and I stared in stunned horror as he held his hands to his melting face. Carol joined in with her own garbled wail, and I whipped my head towards her, vomit burning my throat as I watched her claw at her dissolving eyes. And that was when I noticed Alesta. She was the size of a small cat, poking out of Lita's jacket, her toothless gums bared, her head bobbing as she continued to spit acid at the couple. Lita tried to calm her down now that we were no longer in danger, but Alesta seemed agitated. I frowned, worried by her behavior, and my worry amplified when I realized she was getting weaker. She slumped against Lita's shoulder, and Lita yelped as acid dribbled down her back. I ran over, panicked, and my heart dropped further when I saw something yellow in Alesta's fur. A dart. I pulled it out and looked down at Clark and Carol writhing on the ground. Clark had a gun. Carol had a different type of gun. A dart gun. Fearing the worst, we cradled Alesta, trying to see if she was still alive. We couldn't make out a heartbeat, but she did seem to be breathing. They wanted her alive. They probably brought tranquilizers. She was going to be okay. We just had to get her someplace safe. With Lita's car out of commission, we grabbed the keys off Carol, trying to avoid looking at her liquefied face. Jumping into their SUV, we drove away, Lita behind the wheel. Alesta cradled inside my sling. After a few minutes of ruffled silence, Lita shot me a glare. "How can you trust people so quickly? They helped me escape Yurik. That doesn't mean they aren't after Alesta."
Look out.
Lita gasped and swerved away from a van racing in the opposite direction. All that did was postpone our collision, though, as the SUV bounced down an incline and slammed into a tree instead. Rattled, I shook the ringing out of my ears as I checked on Lita and Alesta. We thankfully had our seatbelts on, and the sling kept Alesta safe against my body, yet my relief was short-lived when Lita looked through my window and went pale. "Is that Yorick?" I gasped and turned to see it was indeed Yorick stomping over to us, the van we just avoided standing idle behind him. How did he follow us all the way here?
Jory.
He roared. "Get out!" Lita yelled, pushing me. "My door is jammed. Move it!" I scrambled out of the car, and she scrambled out after me, wincing as she held her ribs. "You run that way. I'll run in the other direction," she said. "He can't catch us both." I nodded and took off, stumbling through the trees as Yuri yelled at us to stop. I ducked beneath branches and leapt over roots, panting as I shot worried glances behind me. I couldn't see him. I couldn't hear him either. He must have gone after Lita, and I hoped she could outrun him. I looked down at Alesta, sweat dripping into my eyes, merging with my tears. She was still unconscious, wrapped inside my sling, and I hoped I'd be able to keep her safe. A fallen tree lay in front of me, and I gripped its bark and began climbing over it, only to scream as I found myself airborne. Breathless with fear, I looked up, and I gawked at the 4 leathery wings flapping above me. A creature was gripping the back of my shirt with its long snout, its breath hot against my head as it carried me back to the totaled SUV. There, Lita was handcuffed to the handle of the door, our faces falling as we saw each other. Beside her, Yorick had his tree trunk arms crossed, his eyes radiating fury. The creature settled in a tree, its 4 wings gripping the branches as it dangled me in front of Yorick like a prize. My fear battled my determination as I kept Alesta hidden inside my sling. I was going to protect her at all costs.
Where's Razor?
He growled, pulling out his dagger. "We aren't going to let you force her to fight," Lita said, squaring her shoulders. He turns to her.
What?
"Yeah, we know. You're a master," I said.
I'm not a master. I'm a cryptector. I told you that.
"Yeah, just like Clark and Carol," I snapped with sarcasm. "I bet there's no such thing as a cryptector. You're all monsters abusing cryptids." He walked over, and I yelped as he stabbed his dagger into the tree.
I don't abuse them. I save them.
"Then why did Alesta run away from you?" Lita asked.
I already told Jory she didn't. She wanted to complete our rounds through the woods herself while I took an injured cryptid back to our clinics.
"Liar. She ran away, and I bet her scars are from all the fighting you made her do."
I never made her fight.
He paused, breathing hard.
She has scars. You know she does. All over her eyes.
He stared at her before he looked down.
Then they are my fault. Jory said a hunter took her after she protected him from a bear he was taunting. Our cryptids are trained not to injure wildlife. A bear can do severe damage, and I wasn't there with tranquilizers to help her. Tranquilizers to capture her, you mean?
Yorick flared his nostrils as he spat.
I spent the decade thinking Razor had been captured by masters. I searched everywhere for her, ready to slash her kidnappers to shreds. I'd do anything for her.
He turns to me.
And yet, when I found you, I let you go, trusting you'd bring her to me. You failed, and now that I'm this close... No, you let me go so you can track me through that tracker you put in my phone, I said. I wanted to make sure you were going to do what you said you were going to. I watched you, but I didn't intervene until I saw you with the two masters at the cafe. How did you even find us here after I threw out the phone? I shot a drill puck at their bumper. He nodded at the creature holding me. Saber can pick up its scent from miles away. No, there's something else, because you tracked me to the pawn shop too. I didn't track you. I didn't even know who you were. Don't tell me it was a coincidence. No, I was looking for a specific dagger, and most pawn shops I went to were talking about two idiots trying to value blank coins. I got suspicious, because I knew those had to be Cryptector coins, so I went to every pawn shop until I found you. To my luck, you ended up knowing Razor. Now where is she? We're not telling you anything, Lita yelled. You're lying. Admit it. Yori pulled his blade out of the tree, seething. I'm done trying to reason with you. If you don't tell me where Razor is, I'm gonna have Saber barbecue you until there's nothing left. I gasped, recoiling into myself as the back of my head seared. Was Saber a fire breather? If it incinerated me, Alesta would die as well. I looked at Lita, our fretful eyes searching for solutions within the other. I cried out as Saber puffed a scalding blast of smoke, and Lita yelled for Yorick to stop. I'll tell you where she is, she said. Saber's scorching breath eased up, but not my tension, as I watched Yorick walk up to Lita. Where? He asked. I stared in shock as she gave him her actual address. She sounded believable, but Yorick didn't buy it as he bared his teeth and grabbed her by the throat, slamming her against the SUV. You're lying to me. She tried to speak, but all that came out were wheezing croaks as she clawed at his giant hand, her distressed eyes wide. Stop! Let her go! I yelled, swinging and spinning as I tried to squirm free. Saber let out a frightening cackle, and Yorick turns to him. What? What did he mean, what? Did Yorick understand Saber? Was Saber ratting me out? Cold sweat coated my skin, and I tugged at my sling, trying to hide the tuft of black fur visible from above. Lita gasped and coughed, falling to her knees as Yorick let her go, and I braced myself as he walked over to me. I punched and kicked, but it was like punching and kicking cement as he remained unaffected, determined, eager. With his dagger, he sliced through my sling, and I screamed as he twisted my arm down, prying Alesta out of my sight. No, Alesta, I cried out. Let go of her, you monster. Lita croaked, getting back to her feet. He didn't listen as he cradled Alesta, his tears melding with his rage as he traced the scars over her eyes. Lita and I begged him to have mercy on her as he walked to his van, but he ignored us as he got behind the wheel, slammed the door, and zoomed away, disappearing in a cloud of dust. It was over. She was gone.
We failed. With tears, I turned to Lita. She was rubbing her throat, her own tears lining her eyes as she looked at Saber with suspicion.
He left his four-winged pterodactyl here, she rasped. What does that mean?
Sniffling, I turned my head, catching one of Saber's beady eyes looking at me.
I don't know.
She tensed up.
Do you think he wants to burn us? And to get rid of witnesses?
I looked at her with dread.
Oh no. Lita, try to escape.
She grabbed a rock, bashing the handcuffs keeping her tethered to the car, while I twisted and squirmed as I tried to slip out of my shirt. A few minutes later, I was successful. Lita wasn't. Keeping a wary eye on Saber, who was still perched in the tree with my shirt in its mouth, I ran over to help Lita. Despite our blood, sweat, tears, and sheer determination, she remained stuck, and we agreed that I should walk to the nearest town for help. Saber didn't agree, though, and it flew over and pinned me to the ground. I cursed and struggled while Lita threw rocks at it, but she stopped when we heard engines approaching. I looked up as two vans similar to Yorick's parked nearby. A panic squeezed my lungs. More cryptid masters. What were they going to do to us? I held my breath as the doors opened and 3 humans and their cryptids stepped out.
Jory? Lita?
A lady asked as she approached us, a feathery mushroom with 3 tails scuttled beside her.
I'm B. We're cryptectors. Yorick told us where to find you.
Stop lying to us,
Lita rasped, her chin trembling.
We've had enough.
We know you've been through a lot and have been lied to a lot, but we're telling the truth. We work with cryptids to patrol the wild and help protect anyone in distress.
She whistled, and Saber got off me and glided over, perching on the van. Taking the chance, I jumped up and backed away, standing beside Lita as they surrounded us.
I hope Saber didn't frighten you, B said. He's Yorick's other trained cryptid. Yorick left him behind at the headquarters while he went searching for Razor, but he asked for him when he told us he had a lead, and Saber can be a bit eager to please.
Yorick already set the bar for maliciousness,
Lita said, massaging her neck with a glare. Don't worry, a man said with a chuckle, a huge plant-like tarantula frolicking in the dirt beside him. The rest of us aren't as short-tempered as Yorick.
Oh, don't make fun.
Another lady scalded, her coat pocket wiggling.
The poor man spent a decade believing Razor had been kidnapped by masters.
Yeah, but instead of using that anger to help us shut down rings and take down that serial killer Ardell, he went rogue. MIA for 10 years. He could have helped us, and we could have helped him.
Well, I'm glad he contacted us today, B said, and I'm glad he finally found Razor. I'm certain he's relieved knowing she was in good hands the entire time.
Relieved? He almost killed us,
Lita said.
He doesn't tolerate lies, although we understand why you lied. Razor is very lucky to have people willing to protect her as far as she protects them.
All you can do is apologize on his behalf, the man said, walking over with keys. If you'll allow me. Lita and I didn't object as he unlocked the handcuffs.
We can drop you off, the lady with the wiggling pockets said. You don't need to live in fear anymore. Just be sure to let everyone know you will no longer have Razor.
Will Alesta be safe with him?
I asked.
Yes, she's like a child. He raised her from the moment she hatched, and they'd never been apart since. If there's anyone who knows what a Zent needs, especially one as loving as Razor, it's Yorick.
I nodded, swallowing the lump in my throat as I looked at the cryptids before me. Saber, the feathered mushroom, the plant tarantula, the eyeball stalk peeking out of the lady's pocket. They seemed healthy and untraumatized,
not the type of cryptids forced to fight to the death. We'd made mistakes. We'd made wrong assumptions. We'd made bad decisions. But at this moment, I felt I could trust these people. I looked at Lita, and I frowned at the suspicion in her eyes.
I want to see your headquarters, she said, turning to them and crossing her arms.
Of course, B said. It's the least we can do after everything you've done for Razor. We can also tend to any injuries you've incurred. True to their word, they took us to their headquarters, and they showed us everything. A vast expanse of nature for cryptids to roam safe in. A building where they train and heal cryptids. Rooms for research, rest, and play. A nursery full of cryptid babies and nesting and nursing cryptid mothers. It was incredible. Alesta will live in the sanctuary outside? I asked, wincing as a nurse checked the acid blisters on my ear and the superficial burns on my scalp. B nodded. Yes, I believe she may retire.
Can she retire with us?
Lita asked, another nurse checking her bruised ribs. B smiled. We love how much you care for her, but that isn't my decision to make.
It's not Yorick's either. It's Alesta's.
Exactly. Lita did a double take.
Wait, exactly? So you'll let her choose?
Once she wakes up, she'll let Yorick know what she wants.
How? Is he a cryptid whisperer or something?
We all are, in a way. After bonding with a cryptid, their DNA is extracted and injected in their trainer via a specific procedure. This allows us to understand and communicate better with our cryptids.
So you can hear them talk?
No, cryptids don't speak. They flash thoughts and memories. It's rudimentary communication. They aren't as intelligent as humans.
That explains the coins, I said, recalling the double helix and Latin phrase on them. Is it true only those who bond with cryptids can see them?
Yes, it's how we differentiate friend from foe. All done, the nurses said, snapping off their gloves. I slid off the bed and adjusted my new sling.
Thank you.
We really appreciate it, Lita said, pulling her shirt down. You're welcome, they replied with pleasant smiles. Just take it easy for a few days. We nodded. B gestured to the door. All right, if you'll please follow me, we'll find you a ride home. Lita and I returned to her apartment, and I hugged myself. It felt colder in here without Alesta. My eyes watered, and I reminded myself she was in good hands. Lita didn't say anything as she went to her room, and I curled up on the couch, feeling empty. Lita graciously allowed me to continue living with her, and I appreciated it. I needed the company. Maybe she did too. She kept going to work. I kept applying to jobs. She would cook. I would clean. We would talk about Alesta, laughing, crying, bonding. One evening, a week later, as we were reminiscing, Lita's phone rang.
Hello?
She froze.
Yorick?
Yes. Okay, wait. She put the call on speaker. We can both hear you now.
Alesta told me about the past years.
Yorick said.
She told me about the hunter she rescued who took her, and thought getting people to feed her secretly was a good idea.
He scoffed before continuing.
She told me about every tenant who fed her, including you two.
What did she say about us? I asked.
Enough for me to know how much you care for her.
Does she want to live with us? Lita asked, her wide eyes hopeful.
She wants you to become cryptectors.
What? I said in shock. Us? Cryptectors?
Yes. She sees potential in you.
Yorick paused,
So do I.
Is that your apology for how you treated us? Lita asked. Because it's not good enough.
I did what I had to find Alesta. You did what you had to protect her. I'm not asking you to apologize for lying, so don't ask me to apologize either.
Lita rolled her eyes. Fine.
Are you interested in becoming cryptectors?
I need to learn more about it before making a decision like that.
Fair enough. Jory?
I hadn't considered it. I didn't know why I hadn't considered it. I needed a job. I wanted to be with Alesta. It was the perfect solution. Of course, Alesta wouldn't be with me all the time, but I could see her whenever I wanted. I saw no downside.
Jory, I don't have all day.
Yorick said.
I have to give Alesta her vitamins and catch up on all I've missed.
I noticed you're calling her Alesta, I said.
She told me she prefers that name. Now what's your decision?
I'm in. A pointy leg reached for my plate, and I tapped it with my plastic fork. No, Alesta, that's my portion. You already ate yours. After a disappointed huff, she sniffed around the picnic blanket and found an apple, which she rolled over to me with a chirp. Are you seriously trading one of my own apples for my chili? I asked, trying not to laugh. She chirped again, and Lita chuckled. That's a good trade. I'd say take it. Alesta turned her head. Her ears perked, and she sniffed the air up and gurgled as she slithered away. I looked behind me, and I smiled when I saw her curling up around Yorick. She was the largest I'd ever seen her, but his tank-like build had no problem supporting her weight.
She's telling me you aren't feeding her,
he said, walking over. What? I gave her the biggest portion, I said.
Where's my portion?
We did save you some, but a certain Zent couldn't help herself.
Alesta?
She gurgled and buried her face in his neck, and he sighed, chuckling.
What am I going to do with you?
He sat down on the grass next to me and grabbed an apple, which Alesta sniffed with disinterest before slithering off him.
Lita, the Durlusk is ready to give birth. You should go now to bond early with the infant cryptid.
Oh! Lita cheered as she jumped up and ran inside. Yorick took a bite of the apple.
Jory, you still haven't selected a cryptid.
I know. I sighed and put my plate down as I turned to face him. I like them all. I really do. But I don't think I could ever bond with one like I did with Alesta. I know she's yours, and...
There is no mine and yours. We can bond with several, and so can they. She told me she's not interested in retirement, but I don't think she can't handle my responsibilities anymore. She'll be more comfortable with a novice and their workload. I sat up in hopeful surprise. Really? A novice like me? Yes. Joy flooded my core. I'd love that. That'd be amazing. Thank you. You should thank Alesta, if you can forgive her. Forgive her? I turned towards her, and I gasped as I saw her licking my plate clean. Alesta! She chittered and slithered a distance away, only to turn back and lie flat on the grass, her ears perked and head tilted. Whatever happened to evenly splitting our food? I asked. She rolled on her back with a gurgle, and I sighed, chuckling. She knew her greatest weapon against me. Her charm is as dangerous as her protective form, Yorick said, smiling. You need to be firm with working with her, or she'll slither all over you. I smiled back as I went to give her a belly rub.
I don't mind.